bluff them. It's very important that you get a feel for your opponent. Be careful in trapping too early. Of course you can trap with monster hands, but sometimes it's very dangerous when you have a pair of queens and you play it slow before the flop, somebody raised and you just call. You don't know where you're at. You don't know if you have the winning hand when a king flops, when an ace flops. It creates trouble along the way. Sometimes it's going to end up costing you more because you're going to pay him off at the end. You might have won the pot before the flop. So being aggressive is very important. Picking up the pots, not let your opponent get there. Get information about his hands by just calling. You don't know where your opponent is at. A very important factor in poker, no limit hold'em, is you want to gain the extra bets when you have the best hand. You don't want to pay your opponent off when you have the worst hand, and occasionally you want to bluff him once in a while to win pots that you're not supposed to win. And the way to do that is by gaining information. You want to try and get a good educated guess on what your opponent is holding. And you do that by being the aggressor. By being the aggressor, you force your opponent to react to what you're doing. And a lot of times, you get a real good idea of what kind of holding he has. Does he have a strong hand? Does he have a drawing hand? Does he have a medium holding? Or does he have nothing? When he has nothing, he's usually going to fold. You will occasionally encounter very tough players who will raise you with nothing, who will re-raise you with nothing. There's examples of tournaments being played lately where you have some of the toughest players in the world. The guy bets with nothing, the other guy raises with nothing, the first guy re-raises with nothing. You have levels of bluffing that you're not going to see that often. And if we're starting at the basics, don't try this at home. Just stick with the small bluffs here and there. Occasionally on the river, on the turn, you're going to make a check raise bluff. Sometimes you're going to bluff at the river. But the raise, the re-raise, and the re-raise bluff, wait a little bit. Play a couple of tournaments before you try that stuff because it might get you into trouble. Reason for being aggressive, as I stated earlier, especially on the flop. Of course you want to pick up the pot, which happens a fair amount of the time, but you also want to get that reaction from your opponent, see what he has. You get a better feel by getting that reaction. If you just sit back and check all the time, he's the one in charge. He's the demanding guy. He's the one who's going to take away the small pots from you. You want to be the one who takes the small pots, who takes the initiative, gets the reaction, gets the read on your opponent. That's the way you want to play the game. It's a little bit random. I tend to bet in no limit hold'em. The general tendency would be to bet somewhere from, depending on the stakes and compared to how many chips people have, from a third to full size of the pot. I mean, there was no general outline that this was a specific spot where I would always bet half the pot or something like that. You kind of change around a little bit, so nobody has a fixed idea on what you're doing. That's why sometimes when you have a big hand, like let's say aces, sometimes you raise the amount of the pot, half the pot. Nobody can say that, oh, he always goes all in with aces, or he always goes all in with 2 nines, whatever. Vary it a little bit. I think most of the time I bet from a third to the amount of the pot. Not giving anything away, deceive, it might not be the right word, but definitely you don't want anybody to have an idea of what you're doing at a certain time. And they don't, because you mix it up all the time. Sometimes you're tight, sometimes you play medium tight, and sometimes you play a lot of hands. But it varies and it depends on the situation. Sometimes if you're short stacked, maybe you're forced to play very aggressive to try and build your chips, or maybe you play passive to outlast a couple of opponents. It depends on the situation, what fits in, and depends also on your image. When I sit down at the table, I have to make my pre-flop decisions. As I stated earlier, it's important what position I have, it's important what limit we're playing, and of course very important what starting hands I have. What I tend to do, I like to be in there, I like to see a lot of flops, I like to mix it up a lot, but ultimately I like to take away the blinds. The structure of no-limit tournaments is a lot of times the increments go up, and as we get to later stages in the tournament, there's a lot of money in the pot already before anybody has looked at their cards. There's antes in there, and there's the blinds in there. So a lot of my strategy is trying to take away the blinds. So what that means is a lot of times, actually, it's not that important as to what I have, what holding, but what position I'm in. If I'm first to act, I'm going to be very selective, but as we go around the table, if I'm last to act, nobody is in, I'm going to raise just about 100% of the time. If I'm one off the button, nobody is in, I'm going to raise close to 100% of the time. And as we move around the table, as we go to the first position right after the blind, I'm probably only going to try 5 to 10%. Those 5 to 10%, I'm probably going to start with a premium starting hand. So, of course, once in a while, to mix it up, to keep your opponents off guard, I'm going to raise from an early position with a medium hand. It could be a small pair, it could be 6, 7 of hearts, just to mix it up. But be careful, don't mix it up too much. If people see you being too aggressive, raising all the time, then they will re-raise you, and you will be faced with a tough decision. Be very aggressive, but don't be too aggressive. See a lot of people trying to be very aggressive. They see people on TV raising a lot, but they get carried away. They see the work first time, the second time, the third time. But once they get caught, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth time, suddenly they knock themselves out of the tournament in situations where they didn't have to. So it's very important, be aggressive, but also be selective before at pre-flop. Know what situation you're in, know where you're sitting at the table, how many players are still in the pot, are you last to act, first to act. Of course, your starting hand is important, and what limit you're playing. So put all these 3 factors into the equation, and I think you will come up with good decisions. So now that I've given you all the tools you need to win, what would you do in this situation? I'm all in.